Before we begin, please note that this episode of Paper Lives will feature discussions of sensitive topics such as bigotry, racism, and slavery. Please do also note that this episode will have a couple of instances of swearing. Feel free to skip this particular episode, but if you do choose to listen, thank you for listening. Hello and welcome back to Paper Lives, the podcast where we peel back the decaying pages of long-forgotten newspapers and journals to find fragile stories and bring them to life once again. I'm Tommy, your host, and today we will be delving into the Edwardian West London press, taking us to the streets of Hammersmith. Here, we will meet the actor Benjamin Curgerpersong and try to retrace his steps from enslavement in North Carolina to the grand stage of Hammersmith's King's Theatre all the way up until the dock of the Old Bailey. Through his fascinating yet fragile story, Benjamin will show us but a small part of the rich tapestry that was African American and black culture in Edwardian Britain. Benjamin Curgerpersong was 51 years of age on the afternoon of the 21st of June 1903. During that week, he was to take the title role in the esteemed anti-slavery play Uncle Tom's Cabin at the Hammersmith King's Theatre in front of a grand crowd of 3,000 people. He then had much to celebrate as he took his afternoon leisurely stroll. It was a Sunday, and the unseasonable rain that had made this the wettest June on record had thankfully relented. Walking from his home at 124 Blythe Road in West Kensington, Benjamin set off towards the leafy Brook Green, a small suburban park, only a stone's throw away from his home theatre.
I was walking down Brook Green and I looked at a new building, and I was admiring it. I walked slowly back towards Brook Green, and then I stood and looked at some children playing when, all at once, my attention was called to three men.
Those three men would be William and Alfred Beanie, brothers and reservists in His Majesty's Army, travelling with their friend, Horace Apps, a local butcher.
Oi, lads, look at that black fucker.
Benjamin then called out to the surly band.
Gentlemen, why would you try to insult a gentleman? I tried to go along the road without insulting you or anyone else.
The band of brothers and the butcher closed the gap between them and Benjamin in a fighting attitude.
And who the bloody fuck are you supposed to be? You gonna do anything about it?
I am a gentleman, or at least I hope that I am.
Right, a gentleman, yeah. Oh, Bill, give him one.
William Beanie pulled off his coat, a signal amongst the North London community that he came from that a fight was about to begin. Benjamin would later recall what happened next.
The two men then struck at me, and I kicked one of them in the stomach. As soon as I did that, one struck me in the face with a stick, which broke the stick and knocked me down. One man then kicked me, and the other punched me. And it was then, and not till then, that I drew the knife and I cut at them.
Benjamin indeed cut at the group. Slashing in desperation with the champagne opener attachment on a pocket multi-tool that he had, Benjamin dealt some serious damage to his accosters. He then took this chance to run, but the wounded men pursued him to the edge of the suburban park. He tried to get over a rail, and one of the men pulled him back into the gutter on his knees, and then I saw Alfred hitting him, recalled onlooker Henry Morris.
I then saw Curgerpersong bring out a knife again and swing it about with his hand. He hit both of the beanies and then ran away,
added the young Herbert Kimmins, another onlooker. I ran for a policeman, and when the policeman actually finally came, Curgerpersong gave himself up. And I saw them both go to the station, recalled Morris. When he gave himself to the policeman, the exhausted, exasperated and perspired actor only offered up one response.
I did it when they drove me to it.
Benjamin Curgerpersong would then be taken from Hammersmith to the West London Police Court, where the very next day his trial for grievous bodily harm would begin. The following Friday saw the peculiar tale carried across the vibrant West London press circuit, interpolations and interpretations of the court finding their place within the thin West London Observer, West London Reporter and the Fulham Chronicle. Each of these newspapers ran a slightly modified version of the court proceedings. These articles ran under titles such as Uncle Tom in the Dock or Uncle Tom in Court, referencing Benjamin's title role. It's clear that the old kindly figure of passive civility that was Uncle Tom was then well known amongst the working and middle-class readership of the independent West London press, with the irony of such a figure being at the mercy of the law not being lost on the editorial staff. We learn from the newspapers that Benjamin was bailed for the grand prize of £25. According to the Bank of England's inflation calculator, £25 in 1903 today would be worth around £2,500. Benjamin's ability to actually pay this fee speaks to his success. Perhaps after paying this fee, he was to return to the stage before his full trial at the Central Criminal Court, also known as the Old Bailey. After a month on bail, Benjamin came to the Old Bailey on the 21st of July 1903, facing down an unjust and lengthy sentence. The Beanies and their butcher accomplice, now recovered from the retaliatory slashing, made their case once again. Over the course of the afternoon, however, Benjamin's version of events became canon in the minds of the judge and the jury. Presiding Judge Rentoul was clear where his sympathies lay. "My feelings are strongly in favour of the defendant. All of my sympathies are with you, Mr. Curgerpersong. I have a strong impression that these men provoked you, calling you monstrous slurs." According to the newspapers, the jury were of the same opinion. Judge Rentoul continued in his statement. "This is clearly the case of a man being carried away by his temper and using a knife, which is not allowed in this country. We cannot pass over the use of the knife. As my sympathies lay with you, Mr. Curgerpersong, I will deal with this as leniently as possible." At the end of the trial, Benjamin Curgerpersong was sentenced to 3 months' hard labour to be performed at Wormwood Scrubs Prison, a short 2 miles from his home in West Kensington. He was not charged with grievous bodily harm, but with a much less serious unlawful wounding, which might seem bitter considering the bigoted circumstances, but for Benjamin, a man aware of the racist injustice of the United States, as we will discover, this would come most likely as a welcome relief. This vibrant account of the final trial was reproduced not in the West London weeklies, but the National Times of London. The narrative of Benjamin's trial was presented to the faithful readers of the Times through the medium of the daily Central Criminal Court reports, following extensive coverage of parliamentary committees and the London County Council. Unlike the sensationalist West London press, teasingly announcing that Uncle Tom is in the dock, we find in the Times a functional and factual reportage, reflecting the interests of the informed broadsheet reader of the day. Because of this professional, conscientious, and factual form of reporting, we are actually able to ask the question, who was Benjamin Curgerpersong? Who was he truly? We heard from him earlier, but his voice only comes to us through his written statement, preserved in the Times and some of the West London press. Is it possible for us to actually get to know him better? Although all that we currently know comes from these scant pages, we can begin to construct from them a timeline of Benjamin's life, and perhaps, through contemporary voices and experiences, we can begin to piece together this fragile paper life. Across these articles and pages, it's clear that Benjamin was born into slavery in North Carolina, in the United States, most likely in 1852. Judging by his visibly African and potentially Ashanti, so Ghanaian, surname, Benjamin's family, we can surmise, were able to maintain some of their ancestral heritage, resisting the cultural erasure of their white slave drivers. Growing up under the monstrous shadow of slavery in North Carolina would have been unimaginable, if not for the remarkable accounts of Benjamin's contemporaries, who would later recount their youths in enforced servitude.
"I sure has had a hard life. Just work and work and work. I never know nothing but work. No, I never know what it was to rest. I just work all the time from morning till late at night. I had to do everything they wanted to do on the outside. Work in the field, chop wood, hoe corn, till sometimes I feel like my back surely break."
Sarah Grudger, born 15th of September 1816 into slavery.
If I thought that I'd ever be a slave again, I'd take a gun and just end it all right away. Because you're nothing but a dog. You're not a thing but a dog.
That very emotional indictment of slavery comes from Fountain Hughes, born in 1859. Now, unlike many of the voices we've heard so far, this is not a reconstruction. This is actually Fountain's voice from 1949. His and Sarah's testimonies speak to how, for old and young, slavery was a harrowing and utterly miserable experience for the enslaved. Slavery officially ended in the United States upon the conclusion of the American Civil War in 1865, when Benjamin Curgerpersong would have been around the age of 13. Once more, let's hear from Fountain Hughes.
When we found out that we were free, well, then we were bound out to different people. We had no home, you know. We just turned out like a lot of cattle. You know how to turn cattle out in the pasture? Well, after freedom, you know, colored people didn't have nothing.
Times were hard for young black people like Benjamin and Fountain in the years after the Civil War. Former slaves remained, as Fountain hinted at, tied to a land-based servitude, but now with meagre wages that could wave away any idea that they were slaves. The brief improvement in conditions and civil rights seen immediately after the war by some African Americans soon gave way to an age of Jim Crow, a racist regime of segregation and exclusion. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th century, many African Americans from the south of the United States made the great trip north in what would come to be known as the Great Migration. Over the course of 70 or so years, 6 million African Americans made the trip north to permanently settle away from the racist laws of Jim Crow. In 1954, African American historian Rayford Logan termed the period between 1877 to 1901 the nadir of American race relations, a historic low point for African Americans and other ethnic minorities within the United States. Many African Americans left the country altogether. There was a long tradition, going back to the Underground Railroad during slavery, of Americans moving north to Canada, and then many on to Britain. Many more African Americans would once again make those journeys and leave the United States in search of a better tomorrow. Benjamin Curgerpersong was one of these early migrators. If we return to Benjamin's briefly sketched timeline in the Times newspaper, we can see that he came to Britain in 1880, at the age of 28. We cannot know exactly what drove him to come to Britain, but we do know that at this time, Europe was becoming a haven for black actors and performers from the Americas. During this period, black-orientated newspapers across the world began to advertise the imperial metropole of Britain, specifically London, as a land free of prejudice, where anyone could make it.
His color is no barrier to recognition. He can go anywhere where his merits, either intellectual or social, will take him.
The Sierra Leone Weekly News of the 9th of April 1901 informed their readers that people moving to London would have this experience. Elsewhere, figures from the thriving but small black entertainment circuit in Britain began talking to papers back home, with Jamaican singer Carlton Bryan telling the Jamaica Times that
the English people have not got the American colour prejudice. It does not matter in England if a man is black, white, blue, green or yellow.
This vision did not actually reflect the situation on the ground, as Benjamin's altercation would suggest. In 1905, 3 years after Benjamin Curgerpersong's arrest, his countryman Billy McLean wrote to the black-edited Freeman newspaper of Indianapolis, Ohio, that
there are a good many colored performers in England, some doing well and others not. There is just as much prejudice here in England as in America, and you'll find it out if you stay long enough. But I've made my personality win withal by manhood. An Englishman believes in fair play, and an American just doesn't.
Although perhaps a more realistic portrait of English Edwardian race relations, there is still here a glimmer of hope and opportunity behind the eventuality of racism and bigotry. For the African American living in the shadow of slavery and institutional racism, the siren's call of Old England may have become irresistible. We know that Benjamin Curgerpersong came to Britain in 1880, yet the various and alternative spellings of his name across the reportage make it excessively difficult to track his movements between his arrival and his arrest. The Fulham Chronicle, for example, rendered his name as Benjamin C. Persong, erroneously believing that Curger, or perhaps Curzer with a Z if we believe the West London Reporter, was in fact his middle name. Considering they underestimated his age by a decade, it's most likely the Fulham Chronicle's reporters were not entirely reliable and perhaps wrote up their report at the Cumberland Arms pub, the local for the police court. This is all to say that we don't know what Benjamin was actually doing between 1880 and 1903, but we do know that he was entering a small yet thriving community of black Edwardian performers. It's rather difficult to say for certain how many black people called London their home in the first decade of the 20th century, but from contemporary accounts it is clear that the community was extremely small. Sierra Leone's lawyer and satirical writer A.B.C. Merriman Labour gave this illustrative account in 1906.
Black people in London do not much exceed 100, and that even if all are champion experts in the manly art of boxing, it will take them no time to see how foolish it is to attempt to use physical force against the whites. For number, black people are simply a non-entity in the great metropolis. To every one black person there are over 60,000 whites.
Britain may have had a little bit less of the colour prejudice than America, but for black emigres like A.B.C. Merriman Labour or Benjamin Curgerpersong, you were almost completely detached from your community. Actions like that taken by the Beanies were born out of ignorance, leading to bigotry. It may well be that they were surprised to see a black man in Hammersmith, yet their actions clearly betrayed more than racist bemusement. Benjamin found himself in this lonely and uncertain landscape, but he would find allies. Returning to the West London Reporter of the 26th of June, set next to the account of the Curgerpersong trial is a theatrical advertisement showing the week's billings at the King's Theatre, Hammersmith, this week nightly at 8. John Tully's Anglo-American Company, including Miss Amy Height, in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Remarkably, the advertisement for Benjamin's show accompanied the account of his harrowing altercation. Now, Amy Height, mentioned in this article, was his co-star. She was a well-renowned and well-established African-American actress amongst the British music hall circuit. She came to Britain in 1883, only 3 years after her ill-fated co-star. The theatre magazine The Stage extensively profiled her throughout her career, stating of her 1886 performance in a Robinson Crusoe pantomime as displaying considerable humorous power and command of expression. Whilst the vocalization of her songs, she uses a clear and musical organ with considerable skill and effect. This was only one of many glowing reviews that Amy Height received throughout her career from this paper. This is one that remarkably did not have any racially charged language in it, which she often had to deal with throughout even the most positive of her reviews. Throughout her career, Amy Height performed in many Tom shows, as they were known, as the Slave and Chloe. Now, this was the role she would take up alongside Benjamin Curgerpersong in 1903. Because of many weak copyright laws when Harriet Beecher Stowe first penned her very anti-slavery Uncle Tom's Cabin, many unauthorized attempts at dramatizing this particular play were put into motion. These would become known as Tom shows. A good collection of them over in the United States would try to subvert the anti-slavery message by making fun of the characters within, and this is where the racial characterization of an Uncle Tom as a servile object of derision comes from. A good number of these Tom shows in the United States were played as minstrel shows, where the black roles were performed by white actors in blackface, embodying the characters with a whole range of mocking caricatures and stereotypes of black people. Not every single one of these shows incorporated blackface and minstrelsy. Those performed in regions and nations with strong anti-slavery inclinations would often retain the harsh anti-slavery message of the original. Amy Hite and Benjamin Curgerpersong, like many of their fellow black actors, were often typecast in these slave shows and other racially charged comedies, such as the infamous In Dahomey. These shows, whilst drawing upon the insidious legacy of the minstrel show, were often performed by black-led companies, like that of John Tully. These shows provided vital work for black performers and provided an industry for people looking to escape the United States. The pervasiveness of the Tom Show, however, meant that former slaves and those born into the shadow of slavery, like Amy Hite and Benjamin Curgerpersong, could never truly step out of that long shadow cast by the awful institution of slavery. After his conviction, we might expect Benjamin Curgerpersong to disappear into Wormwood Scrubs prison, never for us to hear from him again. But his story was not over. On the 21st of September 1903, the West London Reporter ran a story under the title Uncle Tom to be Released. The Home Secretary, in response to an appeal from Sir Thomas R. Derwar, MP, has advised His Majesty the King to remit 2 of the 3 months' imprisonment recently imposed on Benjamin Curgerpersong. This effectively ended Benjamin's sentence, with him only serving 1 month for the unlawful wounding of the Beanies. The article refers to Benjamin being twitted by the Beanies, rather than being racially abused. Now, of course, the modern terminology for racial abuse would not be developed yet. However, to call this a simple twitting, a word that means to have a good-natured bit of badgering, basically, is a gross underestimation and misrepresentation of the story at large, and once again speaks to the sensationalism and lack of integrity on behalf of these reporters. The nature of Benjamin's release is also worth some comment. Curiously, Thomas Dewar, the MP mentioned, was a very xenophobic Conservative MP who actively campaigned for the Aliens Act of 1905 to eliminate what he would call pauper immigration. Perhaps he was struck by the injustice of this event? Perhaps he was receptive to the remarkable character of Benjamin that we learn from in the articles. Perhaps Benjamin was actually just his favourite actor. We may never know. But what we do know is that at last, Benjamin could finally put this sorry, sordid affair behind him and return to work. Sadly for us, this is where we must leave Benjamin. He does not feature, as far as we can tell, in any more articles in either the West London or the national press. The King's Theatre was demolished in 1963, and its records and collection of playbills featuring Benjamin are lost to the ages. With Benjamin's freedom, then, came, once again, historical anonymity, his name returning to obscurity and featuring in documents only now lost to time. Although Benjamin Curgerpersong's time in public consciousness was short, his story speaks to us across the centuries. He was one of only a few pioneering black people who made their home in Britain during this period, creating a small yet vibrant community of entertainers and actors whose legacy lives on today in the works of Britain's modern black community. His early life was undoubtedly one of immense hardship, mirroring the experiences of his fellow enslaved Africans. We glimpse at Benjamin's defiant spirit through his decision to make a new life in Britain, to leave those shores and to defiantly fight back against 3 surly racists here in Britain. We bear witness to his character through shared experiences and the impression he left on those around him. Through the pages of an ambivalent press, we can see the truth behind Benjamin's words.
I am a gentleman.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Paper Lives. Remember to like, share and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This particular episode of Paper Lives was written and performed by Tommy Hanmer, with special thanks to our guest performers and to Buncombe County Government for the voices provided. We are also grateful to the Libraries of Congress and the Hammersmith and Fulham Archives for their extensive collections. If you would like to find out more about this topic, please go to our website www.paperlivespodcast.wordpress.com, where you will find our full show notes and links to further resources. Once again, thank you for listening and tune in next time when we will uncover another Paper Life.